Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be painting and I'm going to be doing a little sewing. I'm going to show you how I created a Prim style bumblebee and then added a little extra whimsy by creating a hand painted face. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration called All Things Spring. The theme is birds, bees, and butterflies. We have 3 hosts for today's collaboration. We have Dawn with Shabby Meets Bling, Monica with Up All Night DIY, and Marla with The Chic Show. You're going to find the links to their channels inside of my description box, as well as a playlist of all the other videos that creators have contributed for today's collaboration. Well, let's get started. I can't wait to show you. I'm very much a beginner sewer. I don't have a lot of ability, but I'm going to hope to inspire you that even if you don't know how to sew, like I really don't know how to sew, that this might inspire you to give it a try. Well, let's start out and I'll show you the beginning steps of how I created this Prim style bumblebee with a hand painted face. The first step I did was to create a paper pattern, and once I had my pattern all drawn, I laid it on a double layer of muslin and traced around it using a friction pin. Friction pins will dissolve with heat, so they're a perfect tool to trace patterns with. I had a slight modification to my pattern. I decided to make longer arms and legs and only fill them to the halfway point. That would act like an elbow and a knee joint on my final project. I was going to go ahead and cut out the body 1/4 inch all the way around. The front part piece, that was actually going to be the back, and then the inside piece is where I was going to be painting the face. Once I had cut out my piece, I was going to be using a light box to be able to retrace my pattern. I wanted to go ahead and do the outline where I was going to be doing the face, so I had a better idea. And once I had the outline done, I was able to tuck my pattern underneath my fabric, and the light box was going to be able to help me see my image underneath. I went ahead and traced it with pencil, and then I began the painting process. I was going to be starting with the eyes. I wanted them to be big, bright, and bold, a major component of my painted piece. There's an artist, Robin Seabearer, who makes beautiful primitive pieces, but she does whimsical style painting on her faces. I wanted to see if I could recreate some of the elements that she puts in her pieces. So I was going to be making these eyes bright and bold. The color I was going to be using for the eyes for the blue part was sea blue, and then I was going to be taking a little bit of Bahama blue and mixing my colors together. For the white, I used the colors Snow Titanium White, and for the black, I used Black Ebony Paint. These were all the Americana colors. They work great for this process. The fabric I was painting on was kind of like a little bit more like a canvas material, even though it was muslin. It was not primed or anything, so the paint acted like I was painting on an unprimed canvas, which did have a few challenges. I tried using a little bit of water to thin my paint, but that really wasn't a good option. The paint was traveling out of the areas that I was trying to keep it in when I used water. A better solution was using the Folk Art floating medium agent. It's more of a gel, and it helped keep my paint where I wanted it to go and stayed within that certain area. The floating medium worked really well as a blending agent, so that's what I used for the whole piece, especially on the face, to keep my colors nice and blended. I was able to even add more interest to my eyes by adding a few color floats of a dark navy on the outside of the eyes, adding some highlights inside of the eyes using the spa blue color, and doing some dots and dashes with my stylus to create some highlights. Now it was time to add a little bit more drama, and I was going to be using the Stabilo Marxall pencil. The Marxall pencil does have some unique properties. It is water soluble, but once the water is dry, your pencil marks should be permanent. I was going to be using the floating medium instead of water to be able to activate my pencil. And once I put that floating medium on there with my brush and kind of scrub it in, those lines turn to rich black lines. This pencil is one of my favorites to use in mixed media pieces, and I thought it would work perfect on this unprimed canvas. The color from the pencil should just sink easily into the fabric and become permanent. To trace out my nose and my lips, I used a micron pen. Micron pens have permanent ink inside, so there was no worry about my marker blending around once I put the floating medium or paint over the top. To create the blush cheek look for this bumblebee, I was going to be using the color Cactus Flower and a scruffy old brush. I like using this scruffy old brush to create my cheeks with. I dip it into the paint, rub it on my palette, and then I scrub it into my hand until the paint feels dry. By doing this, I know I have enough paint removed so I can go ahead and then do circles and blush that paint around, and it's going to end up being a nice dry brush look and not oversaturated with paint. I added a little bit of that pink to her lips too. I didn't want her to look like she was wearing lipstick, but I still wanted a little bit of color. The next step I was going to do was I was going to be trying to add a little bit of dark shadow around her face. And this is where I ended up almost ruining the piece. I know. I started with the outside. I had the floating medium on my brush, but what I probably should have done was actually went in with straight floating medium off on my fabric first, and then perhaps added my paint over the top. I almost had a mess, but I was able to take the floating medium, scrub that area out, and then I added a little bit more of the brown. I did add some white to try to soften it. This is the moment you pull out all your little painting tricks that you might have. So I was able to blend my colors on the top, still using a little bit of a dry brush method, and using that same brush I did her cheeks in, I used that to add the layers on. I wanted light layers to see if I could blend it from being dark into more of a light. In the end, I decided to go ahead and add the color King's Gold on top. It's an apple barrel color. And I thought, well, a bee could be kind of yellow. So I added some yellow on the top, and I think I saved her. Yeah, it was a happy dance moment. I gave her some lashes using the micron pen, and I added little tiny lines in the eyes to add even more interest to those irises in the inside. It's a great look. The artist I had spoken about earlier, Robin, she does create those little lines in the irises, and I love that look about her eyes, and I definitely wanted to include that line work in mine. At the very end, I do go back to the face and add even more color to add even more definition to her face. But I'm going to call it good right here and start the process of painting the body. To paint the arms, the legs, and the body, I was going to be using the same color I had painted in the inside of her eyes. I added some water to my paint. This always helps your paint glide easier across your fabric, and it also helps with the stitching process. If you have a thicker paint, when you go to hand stitch on your fabric, it really does make it very difficult. So by adding a little bit of water, you're going to be able to glide your paint across much easier and also be able to hand stitch your pieces so much easier. It also does give you more of an even look across your piece. For the detail areas, I used an angle brush to paint around those, but for the other area, I used a chip brush. I put the paint as close to the edge as I thought possible. That way, when I stitched around it, in the end, I wouldn't see any of the fabric, raw fabric showing, but you could always go back in the end and add some black paint if you need to. Once the pieces were dry, I gave them a light sanding using 220 grit sandpaper. It's just going to soften the fabric and give it a nice little brushed fabric look. To create the bumblebee stripes, I was going to be using the sunflower fabric that I had dyed in coffee stain, and it just kind of softened the white background and gave it that aged look I was wanting. Up next, it's time to sew some of these pieces together. I was going to be using black thread, but you could use any color that you wanted to. And here's a prime example of how I really don't sew well. See those lines? They don't follow the pen, but it doesn't really matter in the end. It's still going to look adorable and really cute. Once you have your pieces sewn, you're going to need to trim all the excess off your pieces. You're going to leave maybe about, an 1/8 of an inch. Just be really careful not to cut into your seams. What you want to do with that little leftover piece is take your scissors and make little nip marks all the way around. This is going to help your pieces lay flat when you turn them the right side out. For the arms, I made them closed all the way around. I sewed them all the way around, so I needed to make a little slit there to be able to add the stuffing on the inside. I was still going to be making those little nips all the way around the outside so my seams would lay flat. When you get this far, it's time to go ahead and turn your pieces the right side out. I have these turning tubes. They really help with small pieces. You stick the tube on the inside, use the little stick that it comes with, poke it through there, and then kind of just push up, and it really does make simple work of turning your pieces the right side out. And eventually I do get it. You can take that little wooden tool again that comes in there and actually take it and then poke inside of there to get your pieces to the seams to be able to pop out where they're supposed to be and kind of flatten the seams on the inside too. It's a great little tool. They're not that expensive to get, and I highly recommend them if you're going to be doing any type of these little Prim sewing projects. Now it's time to go ahead and add the polyfill. I like to go ahead and take small little pieces, and this hemostat tool works great because it has that little locking device at the bottom, and then you can push it down to where you want it, go ahead and pinch your polyfill, and then unclip your device and then pull it out. It works great for getting into these small little pieces and getting your stuffing way down into the toe. I was only going to be filling those halfway full, so that's why I stopped there. I went ahead and filled my hands to about halfway full as well, and now I'm going to go ahead and hand stitch those closed. I'm just using a simple little whip stitch where I'm going over and under and closing up my piece. The reason why I chose to do my arms this way is because I was going to be able to see the top of the shoulder of my piece, and I was going to be using a doll needle to sew all my pieces on. So I was going to see the top of that joint, and I wanted it to have a finished look, so that's why I created it this way. To create the knee and the elbow joint look, I was going to be stitching over the top. I took some pins and marked my area where I wanted to stitch, put it on the sewing machine, and just went back and forward a couple times to make my seam. Went ahead and clipped the little extra threads off. You need to make sure both of your arms and your legs match up, so you want to have them next to each other while you're doing the pinning, so you can tell that your arms and legs are going to match. Now to add a few more fun details. To create the stripes for my bumblebee, I wanted that hand-torn fabric look. So I took a little nip on my fabric and then just hand ripped it to create those nice fringed edges. I was going to be laying them out and then just doing some simple sewing from one side to the other, and I went ahead and I did it more than once, and I was okay with my line work being wonky. As a matter of fact, the wonkier the better. I like the look of the ripped fabric and the uneven stitch quality. To even help make those fringe edges pop out even more, I took the fabric in my hand and just kind of balled it and rolled it around, and that makes your edges even more raggedy. The raggedier the better, I think. And this is what she looks like with all of her stripes and all of her little wonky lines and all of her little tattered fabric. Next up, we're going to attach those legs. I'm learning new tricks, and I'll show you how I did it. The trick I learned was how to place the legs to get it look like they were sewn inside of the body. Have the toes face her face, and then go ahead and sew the lines all the way across on your hemline. That way you can go ahead and flip your feet down, sew the back on to this piece, and it's going to look like they're sewn inside of the body. So you can see the back piece here, I have it pinned on to the front where I had painted, and her legs will be in the right direction when I go ahead and flip this piece right side out. I'm going to stop there at the bottom and not go any farther than that when I'm sewing. Once I got it sewn, I went ahead and did the same thing, trimmed my seams all the way around. But this time when I got to the neck, I did take out a bigger nip there, actually a triangle shape right there at that neckline. That's just going to help it fold out a little bit better when I add the polyfill to the inside of my bumblebee. I don't trim the very bottom of that piece there because I want to have some sort of seam allowance to be able to fold over and stitch together when I'm stitching the final piece together. I have to have that hole in order to put my polyfill there, so I need to leave it open, but I want a little extra fabric to be able to stitch. Once you have all of the edges taken care of, go ahead and turn that piece the right side out, and then I use that wooden tool that came with my turning set to rub on the edges and push and pull to get the seams all popped out. The next detail piece I'm working on are my bumblebee's wings. I had this piece of fabric in my stash, and I thought it might make interesting wings because of the pattern. The pattern is printed, and the print actually is slightly waxy, and it has a resist quality to it. So when I put it into the coffee stain, it's going to take the coffee stain slightly different, and the print's going to pop out a little bit more. I used the friction pen to sketch out my wings, and once I had it drawn, I went ahead and I folded over my fabric, so when I cut it out, I'd have the exact mirror image on the other side. I mixed up a batch of instant coffee stain, and that's what I was going to use to age this fabric. Instant coffee is always a go-to for me. I love the deep, rich gold and brown mixture that you can get with instant coffee. I wanted to take a moment and thank our hosts today, Dawn, Monica, and Marla, for hosting today's collaboration. Definitely take some time, check out their channels, as well as click that playlist. I'm sure you're going to be inspired to create something fun for your spring. Here you can see how the fabric takes the coffee stain differently. In the printed area, it's a lot lighter, and then the background fabric area has that really deep tone. I really did like the look in the end. To give my piece a little bit of weight so it would be able to sit well, I created a small little pouch of the glassette beads. I just did a simple little rectangle, sewed it, and then filled it with some of the glassette beads. If you use these, make sure you always have something underneath because these little things go everywhere. That's my little Mr. Otis. He's so curious. He can't help himself. If I'm doing something on my dining room table, he wants to see what I'm doing. So here are these pieces all dried. You can see how the one side dried slightly darker and the other side dried lighter. I was going to be using the lighter side. I wanted to have a little bit more bulk to this piece, so I was going to be stitching it onto a piece of felt on the inside. I traced around my wings, and then I'm going to take it to my sewing machine, and I'm going to create a stitched quilt look. I know, who do I think I am? I don't know how to sew. But I really did want to create this look, and having that felt underneath there sandwiched between the two pieces, I was going to be able to create that quilted type of look. So I just used my sewing machine. I went 1/4 inch around. First I started down the middle and made a straight line, and then I went on the one side and I stitched around the wings. And when I got to the other side, I did the same thing, and then I just kept on going. And in the end, I was really happy with how it turned out, especially for being a non-sewer. Again, embrace the wonky, the unevenness of it, and go with it. Just try and experiment. So this was a grand experiment for me, but I was super happy with how it turned out. It may not win a blue ribbon at the fair, like my grandma might say, but I really do like it. I went ahead and I painted the arms and the legs and gave them a sand as well. Now it's time to add the polyfill to the inside of the body. I use that hemostat tool as well. I go ahead and I clip the polyfill on the end, and then I use it to go way up into the corners and push it way up in there. This step is really important. You want to be able to have a lot of stuffing inside of your character. If you see those little dents on your face or at the top of your head, you don't have enough. Use that wooden stick too to kind of compress the polyfill inside. This step is a really important one. Take your time and do it. You won't be sorry you did. Once I had the body pretty much filled, I put those pellets inside of there, added a little bit more stuffing around the end, and then I hand sewed it shut, just like I did with the arms. To attach my arms, I was going to be using crochet thread and thread it onto a doll needle. Doll needles come in a variety of lengths. I think I was using about a 5-inch doll needle. That way I was able to go from one end of my doll to the other with my needle. I started at the one end and then went all the way through, pulled it tight, and then attached the arm on the other side. I went back and forth about 4 times, and then I tied it off in a knot. I was going to be taking a button that I had already threaded, and I was just going to be using hot glue on that to attach it to the top of my arms. When I created the arm, I did do that rounded shoulder that was all the way sewn, so that way it looked like a finished edge. So by putting it on with the doll needle and threading it from one end to the other, I was attaching them securely, and it just made for an easy sewing process to do it this way. To add the finishing touches to the wings, I took a variety of wooden buttons, went ahead and added the thread to them, and then just simply glued them onto the wings. I like the extra dimension that the buttons really brought to this piece. And look at how cute they look! Oh my goodness, adorable, right? To finish off the neckline, I took some coffee-stained fabric and tied her a little bow around her neck. I wanted the ends to be a little bit more raggedy, so once I had it tied, I took the scissors and created little nips and then ripped them into little finer pieces. Added another button to her neckline to add to the interest, and I think that looks pretty good. To attach the wings, I used the doll needle again and went from the back to the front. I was going to be making that stitch right underneath where that little bow tie was going to be covering it up, so it wasn't going to show. And then for the tummy area where I was coming through, it ended up being underneath a stripe. So it all worked out. You didn't even see where I was going to be putting the stitches to attach the wings. To add a colorful stripe to my bee legs, to add just a little bit more interest, I used some King's Gold and painted a set of 3 stripes on each leg. Of course, my bee needed some antennas, so I took a lightweight wire and wrapped it around that wooden tool. Boy, that sure came in handy for this project. Made a little curl and then added a rusty bell at the end. To be able to go ahead and secure that little antenna down into the head, I took a wider needle, a darning needle, and made a hole just on the side of where I'd stitched it. And after I had the hole, I was able to poke my antenna down inside and then add a little glue to the front and the back of the wire, and it held perfectly. I like the look of my bee face, but I wanted more color. I decided to use my Derwent Ink Tense pencils with a little bit of hand sanitizer that was a gel to be able to spread out the colors. I had watched some video one time that said you could use a gel hand sanitizer. You know, I think I could have used the floating medium and accomplished the same thing, but I really did like the blended look. Ink Tense pencils work like watercolor. They're activated with moisture, but it's not watercolor inside. It's actually ink. And when they dry, they are permanent. Lots of people use them on fabric. I'd seen different quilters, so I thought they would work great to add this little extra layer. I really wanted that darker edge of between the dark of her forehead and her face, and this did the trick. I took 2 different colors. I had a reddish brown and a darker brown and was able to add that around her face. And I took that darker brown pencil and I added it to the bottom of her eyes just to add another depth of color so it wasn't just black. Added a little bit to the top of her nose and actually went ahead and put in a few freckles, which I thought looked adorable. Well, let's see what she looks like all finished sitting in my studio. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed watching this tutorial. If you've already subscribed, go ahead and click that bell so you get notifications of any new videos I might put up. If you enjoyed watching this tutorial, here's a couple more you might want to check out. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll create right along with me.